listen to this. That's why everyone.
All right, so like I said, we're going to do wisdom literature tonight. And wisdom literature is primarily the three books, which are Job, it's like Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. I'm terrible at spelling, so if I misspell something, just forgive me. Those are the three primary ones, but also some of the Psalms are included in that, which we won't get into tonight. But many times the is Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, as it's often called. So these four are going to be our target tonight, and then next week we'll get into the entire book of Psalms. So the term wisdom literature is not a biblical term. It's just a word or a phrase that we use to just to classify these books and that type of literature. And it's not just found in the Bible. We actually have a lot of that type of literature in Egyptian culture, ancient Egyptian culture, and Mesopotamian culture. There was one that was like I saw from Egypt. It's like the battle or the debate between winter and spring or winter and summer from Egypt. And I believe that the Epic of Gilgamesh is considered wisdom literature as well. If you've ever looked into that, it's a fascinating read because there's a lot of parallels between that ancient piece of literature and the Bible. But the idea is to look at the differences, not necessarily the similarities, but the differences and how they differ, not just how they compare. But tonight we'll look at the Bible. So there's primarily in the Bible two types of wisdom literature, but also in the ancient world. You have your brief Proverbs. These are brief proverbial maxims, and they state observations about life in general. And these tend to be more optimistic in nature. They're instructional, and they tend to be more optimistic. Again, they tend to be more optimistic about life. The second type is your more lengthy discourses. So these are like essays. They're grappling the life's more challenging topics, and these tend to be a bit more pessimistic in nature. And we say that Solomon was kind of the fountainhead of wisdom literature in the Bible. It's not that he wrote it all, but he was kind of the source and inspiration for that genre. I like to compare him to Tolkien. When you think of fantasy books, you think Lord of the Rings is like the source of all modern fantasy. Period. All, whether they like him or not, all fantasy authors have been influenced by Tolkien in some form, shape, factor at all. Like you can't tell me the Game of Thrones guy was not influenced by Tolkien. Like everybody was influenced by Tolkien, because he is like the fountainhead of fantasy. Solomon, I don't think that he wrote every proverb. A lot of times we attribute it to him, the entire book, but a lot of it was probably written by other wise men But he was kind of the fountainhead of it all. He probably didn't write Job. As we'll see in just a second, we don't really know much about Job. But as we move through the wisdom books, think Solomon as the fountainhead of it all. All right, let's jump into Job. Anybody know who wrote Job? Me neither, because nobody does.
Most told Moses.
There's a bunch of theories, but we don't know. We just don't know. We don't know when it was written, and we don't know who wrote it. Yes, sir.
Do they know when it was added to the
Canon?
Yeah.
Probably towards the end or the beginning of the Second Temple period, around the time of Ezra, is probably when it was. They read it, they knew it, but was it considered scripture? Probably not until that time period, if I remember correctly. A lot of people, at least the ESV Bible, I believe, they say that they think it was written around the time of the return from exile, around the time of Ezra, because of some of the language that's used. I've also heard that it was the very first book of the Bible written. So you got two pretty extreme opinions, just because of like the locations and the nations that are kind of represented. But we don't know. But the book itself, it's written almost like a play, right? You've got these different characters, and they have their parts, and they have these long, drawn out speeches and dialogues and monologues, and they're going back and forth for pages and pages, and it's like poetic play. And the main characters are Job and God. They're the main characters. And the book wrestles with some of life's most difficult topics. Specifically, the speaker deals with undeserved suffering and the problem of, fun word, theodicy, or the vindication of divine goodness and providence in view of the existence of evil. In other words, why do bad things happen to good people? And if God is good, why is there evil in the world? That is the discussion of the book of Job. So the curtain opens, right? So the curtain opens, and it takes us to, it starts telling us about this guy. His name is Job, and we're introduced to this godly and successful man. He has it all. He serves the Lord faithfully. He's got successful businesses. He's got a wife. He's got a bunch of kids. He's got good health. And in both man's eyes and in God's eyes, he is a winner. He's a righteous man. He's a faithful man. He's a good father. He's a good businessman. He's doing everything right. The scene transitions, though, to heaven. And the Lord is meeting with the sons of God, right? Sons of God, plural. And so in Psalm 82, we're also introduced to, let's see here, Psalm 82. It's kind of it's an interesting topic, right? The sons of God, because we think the Son of God. But the sons of God is like, it's a council. It's a divine council. So God is basically, he's got like, in the Old Testament, we're shown that he's got this council and these other lower G gods that he's meeting with, and they're discussing all kinds of stuff. But then this new guy comes in, this new character in the story, the Satan. And I put the Satan for a reason, use the article, because this is actually a title, which means adversary. This is a title, it's not a name. This is a title. I don't know why. I don't know. It poses a lot of questions that I don't understand, to be quite honest. Because when we think of Satan, we think of the character that we're presented with in the New Testament, right? Kind of the main enemy, the big bad guy who the Lord will defeat in the end. This is a title, and it simply means the adversary. But God and Satan, they start to have a conversation. In Job 1, there, Job 1, 7. To 12. All right. Who would like to read that? Job 1, 7 to 12.
The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house, and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work on his hands, and possessions, and his possessions have increased the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." Do you want me to go through 12?
Yeah, go ahead and read 12.
And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold all that he has in your hand. Only against him Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
So Satan goes to the Lord, like, "Hey, can I test this guy Job for you? I just want to make sure that he's faithful to you, right? Let me take his property away. Let me take his children away." But in all of that, Job never sins. He never curses God. He stays faithful to God throughout losing all his kids. His kids are killed. But he stays faithful to the Lord in all of that. It's a sad tale, right? But he stays faithful. So Satan then, because Job was still faithful, Satan's, he's probably irritated. And I love the next scene, because Satan goes back to God, and he goes back to God, and he basically says, the Lord looks at Satan and is like, he says basically the same thing. "Where have you been?" He's like, "Oh, just roaming the earth. Have you considered my servant Job?" It's like, it's being a little snarky. God gets a little sassy in this book, and I find it wonderful. It's so funny. He's sassy the whole time. He's very sarcastic, I think. So Satan again's like, "Well, you didn't let me take his health away. If you let me take his health away, then he'll curse you this time." And so the Lord's like, "All right, well, take his health. You can make him sick, but you can't kill him." And so Satan, he goes back and he attacks Job's health, and he gives him these boils and these sores, and they're so bad that he has to take broken pot pieces and scrape the sores to relieve himself. That's how much pain he's in. And even his wife is like, "Job, just curse God and die. Give up." His own wife is going after him. to give up and to sin. And he's like, I will not do it. I will not do it. I will not go against the Lord. And in all that, he never sins. And then, lucky Job, his friends show up to comfort him. And I think they get a little bit of a deserved bad rap. But at the beginning, they do the perfect thing, I think, that sometimes we need when we're going through suffering. Let's see here. It's chapter 2, verses 13. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Sometimes the thing that we need to do as believers when someone is going through a tough time is just sit there in silence with them and let them cry. I think that's biblical. I think we should cry with people. But then they open their mouth, and that's where we all get in trouble, when we start to talk. And so the next section starts these dialogues between Job and his friends. And it's a poetic section, and it shows the back and forth conversation between Job and 3 of his friends. And it begins with Job cursing the day he was born, and then his friends try to comfort him. Each friend takes a different philosophy when trying to comfort Job. And while boasting to fear God of the Bible, their arguments reflect more of a Mesopotamian theology. So he's got 3 friends. He's got Eliphaz, he emphasizes God's justice, and purity. But he says that people bring trouble on themselves. He's got next friend is Bildad. And he appeals to tradition and considers himself a defender of orthodox doctrine. So, orthodox. Orthodox doctrine. He says that a person who pursues wickedness, like Job, should not be surprised by divine punishment. Wickedness leads to judgment. Okay. Then the next guy, number 3, is Zophar. And he's the worst Zophar. I make that joke every time I talk about this book. I always get the same response. And he considers himself a rationalist. Says that Job's punishment was no less than expected. What a friend.
Yeah.
Job deserves. So basically, they're all saying that Job has brought this all upon himself. And so this happens in 3 cycles. Job shares, his friends will share, and he'll share, and back and forth 3 times in 3 cycles. After each argument is presented, Job comes back with a rebuttal, and then the next friend will will jump in and share, and then a rebuttal 3 times in the cycle, over and over and over again. Then, finally, a new guy pops up. Somebody with some sense. A 4th friend who apparently has either been watching in the shadows or he showed up late. He came to the 11 o'clock service. His name is Elihu. He's the 4th friend.
Elihu?
Elihu? Oh, he's the 4th friend. That was best joke so far. And he gets upset with Job and criticizes him for trying to justify himself rather than God. And he turns to the other friends and he fusses at them for trying to condemn Job with no answer. So Elihu gives 3 speeches and basically tries to say that the Lord uses pain and suffering to correct people. And our prayer is our way of submitting to him. His second speech is he's rebuking Job for questioning God's justice. And in his third speech, let's go this way. I'm writing down. God uses pain and suffering rebukes Job for questions God's justice. And 3, he says that God is unaffected by worldly events, and his silence should clue us in that Job is insincere. And that the Lord is just. The Lord is just. He says the Lord is just in all that he does, and in the way he treats both king and slave. So finally, somebody with some form of sense, hey, look, it's not about you, it's about the Lord, right? And the Lord uses pain and suffering, and he uses it to shape us. And the Lord is just in the way that he treats both king and slave. The way he treats people is good and right. Then the Lord shows up. The Lord comes into the picture, and then the rest of the book is basically the Lord's response to Job. Man, it gets fun. And so there's this a little bit of a back and forth between Job and God, but mostly it's God asking Job a bunch of rhetorical questions. And Job has basically nothing to say. And so I love this. So let's go to chapter 38. Chapter 38, verses 1 through 3. Would somebody read that, please? Job 38, 1 through 3.
And the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, and said, Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge, dressed for action like a man? I will question you, and you make it known to me.
So he says to Job, who are you who's asking me all these questions, who doesn't know anything? Put your pants on, dress like a man. We're going to go a few rounds, and we'll see who knows what. So, and his first question is to Job is, somebody read that first question right after verse 3.
You when I laid the foundation of the earth.
And it just keeps getting worse from there. It's like, Job, I created the heavens and the earth. Where were you? Where were you when I did that?
Way to wipe dirt to be born.
Yeah.
Pretty brutal, honestly.
Yeah. Keep going. Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Who determined the measurements of the foundations of the earth? Surely you know.
Surely you know.
Or who stretched the line upon it? Or what were on what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Who shut the sea and who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? Like, these are brutal questions, but beautiful because it's doing two. Just there's so many layers here, right? You've got this poetic description of God creating the heavens and the earth, but also is him saying, Job, you weren't there. You weren't there. You don't know how in control I really am. You don't see my sovereignty in all of this. But Job, or the Lord, just keeps asking these questions, just like that, over and over and over and over again. And through chapters 38 and 39, Job says nothing, not a single word. So the Lord goes through different elements of creation, and he basically is hammering Job with all these questions and asks Job if he knows anything about them. He questions Job about animate objects. He says, where do eagles make their nest? Do you tell eagles where to make their nest? Do you? Oh, no. He talks about inanimate objects. Actually, he says that first. Inanimate objects. Like the sea. Who shut the sea behind its doors? Who tells the sea where to stop? Who does that? Do you? Who tells lions where to hunt? These are just examples of some of the questions that he's asking. Do you know when the mountain goat gives birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Over and over and over again, he questions Job. And Job says nothing. Finally, in chapter 40, Job works up enough courage to respond. He doesn't say a whole lot, but he basically, it's like, yeah, I don't know. Sorry. And then the Lord starts up again, and he starts to talk about mythical creatures like the Leviathan and the Behemoth. And we don't really know exactly what those things were. Probably some sea creatures or some large animals on the land. But the Lord's like, look, the Leviathan, it describes as like this great sea monster. He's my pet, and I tamed him. Did you do it? I don't think so, buddy, but I did. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he speak to you with soft words? Like the Leviathan was the fear of every sailor. It was think like the Kraken on Pirates of the Caribbean, right? That's the thing. That's the level of monster that he's talking about here. And the Lord's like, it fears me. It is afraid of me because I defeated it. I caught it like a little fish, and is pleading with me for freedom. And at the end of all these questions, all Job can do, rightfully, is repent. That's his response to all of this. He says, Lord, I'm sorry. Shouldn't have done that. You know what the Lord does? He gives him back everything. Double. Gets a bunch more kids. He doubles his businesses. He restores his food. I don't know if his wife got better. He got 2 wives, maybe. I don't know. It doesn't say that. But at the end of it all, none of Job's questions are really answered satisfactorily. Is that a word? Satisfactorily? Yeah, sure. But that's kind of the point, though, I think. In life, wicked things happen to people. But God is good and just. We can trust that. We can hope in that. And that is our foundation. And that is our confidence that even though terrible things happen to us in this life, God is good and just. That is the book of Job. All right. That book of Proverbs. What is a proverb? It is a succinct or persuasive saying proven true by experience. There's like a quick, short little phrase that is proven true, broadly true by experience. They're not necessarily promises, but they're general principles. And they're not commandments. But our goal is to look for the general truth in the proverb. But it's contemplative literature. This isn't just something that you read through real quick. Like, oh, I read 3 chapters of Proverbs today. Good. I would challenge you, though, to just read maybe 5 Proverbs, 5 verses. Just read them over and meditate on them. Meditate on them over and over and over again. Chew on them for like an hour instead. For example, read them. All right, we'll take this one. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. Meditate on it. There's another one to think about. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. Read that one again. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. Quick, brief little phrase, but there's so much punch in that brief little phrase. But we can't just read it quickly. We need to pause, read it, pause, read it, really meditate on it to let it sink in. There's a lot of wisdom packed into those small little sentences. That's what the book of Proverbs is, mostly. To contemplate on it. Take time, like Psalm 1 says, to delight and meditate on them. Read them slowly. It's like a glass of bourbon as opposed to like a water bottle. Just sip it, let it enjoy it, or a cup of coffee, as opposed to like one of those energy shots, right? Sip it, enjoy it. That's one of my favorite things in the morning is what?
Coffee.
Oh,
Not bourbon.
yeah.
Coffee and bourbon.
It's only on Sundays.
Oh, it's Fridays. Fridays and Sundays.
But it's that first sip of coffee. But you don't just chug the coffee. You got to sip it, enjoy it. You can't chug coffee. Oh, that's crazy. Oh, people who chug coffee here, you can't trust people who do that. Sometimes I have to. But contemplate it. Take time to read it, study it. So the basic outline of the book is you got your title and prologue, of course. You got your introduction, and it's basically, hey, fear the Lord begins with, or the wisdom. Fear the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if you want wisdom, fear the Lord. So that's the introduction to the book. That's 1 through 7. But then it opens up with this father's instruction to his son. And he's like, hey, pursue wisdom. Basically, make that your life's pursuit. And he basically begins to unfold this picture of the wisdom as lady wisdom versus harlot, prostitute, folly, foolishness. And so you've got this godly woman, this very godly woman who's modest, who is wisdom, and she does everything well and right and good in the eyes of the Lord. And then foolishness is prostitute. And basically the dad is saying to his son, pursue the good, holy, godly godly woman. Don't pursue the foolish, quick pursuit. Go after her. This leads to destruction. This leads to life. She will destroy your life. She will make your life terrible. She will make your life wonderful.
You're welcome.
So that's basically that first section. Then you get into like the quick little Proverbs of Solomon. That's what makes the book famous. And then you've got some more sayings of the wise, and then you've got Hezekiah, who is a king, in the line of David, and he collected a bunch of Solomon's sayings and put them together. And then you've got the sayings of Agur and the sayings of Lemuel. And then the book ends with a mother giving wisdom to the son. And he's telling him how to pick a wife, basically. He's instructing him in what a godly woman looks like. And he's saying, oh, let's see. Let's go there. 31. Starting in verse 10. Like an excellent wife, who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. And it goes on and on about what a godly woman looks like. And it's a mom's instruction to her son and how to find a wife. and what to look for in a godly woman. And so you've got these two bookends, right? You've got the father's instruction. Go after Lady Wisdom. She's good and right. And this actually, I think, is kind of layered in its interpretation. This pursue wisdom, of course, but also flee, like pursue a godly woman. Son, don't go after folly, of course, but also keep your pants on. Like I believe he's trying to instruct his son to stay steady, to not go after loose women. And then the book ends with the other end of the book. Book end is the mother instructing her son in how to choose a godly woman, how to find a godly woman. And in the middle of all that, you have all these wise sayings throughout the book. And that is the wisdom that the Father is talking about. But the beginning of wisdom, the beginning of all that is fearing the Lord. Moving on to the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes means preacher. The book is basically a sermon by a preacher about life, and can really come across a bit cynical. We're not entirely sure who wrote this book. Most of the time people will say Solomon, but we're not really sure. The book never really says verbatim. It says the son of David, but that can mean a lot of things. And in a way, this book is a companion book to the book of Proverbs. And in fact, along with Job, the three books make up primarily the section what we call wisdom literature. And Proverbs presents life and how it should be, right? The famous one is raise up a child in the ways he should go, and he will never depart from it. Right? Generally, that's true. But not always. Think of it like this. We've got 4 seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. Winter is bitter cold. Spring is starting to warm up. Summer is blazing hot. And fall is starting to cool down. That's the principle, right? Generally, that's true. Unless you live in North Carolina, where one day is 70 degrees and you're wearing shorts, and then the next day it's snowing. And then the next week it's 95 and you're trying to fix your air conditioner. Like it doesn't make sense. Generally, the principle is true. These seasons are there, but North Carolina always likes to throw wrenches to get stuck in the gears and just throw things out. And Proverbs is showing you how life should be. It's the very optimistic thing. But Ecclesiastes is saying life is messier than that. Not that clean. And It's kind of depressing sometimes. And so the word of the book, and life, again, life doesn't bring satisfaction. And the word of the book, the word you got to know, just really wrap your head around, and when you're studying the book of Proverbs, is the Hebrew word hevel. Hevel. It means smoke. It literally means smoke or mist. Most English Bibles will translate it meaningless or vanity. But over and over again, the author says, the preacher says, life is hevel. Life is meaningless. Life is vanity. Life is smoke. Now think about smoke for a moment. What is smoke? You start a fire, right? And you've got this stuff coming up off of it. You can see it. You can feel it. You can taste it. It gets in your eyes. And when you're sitting around a campfire, you try to escape from it, but it just gets in, it chases you around. You can't get away from it. You try to grab it, but you can't. Try to grab smoke. You can see it. You can taste it. You can smell it, but try to grab it. It's elusive. Smoke is real. We know it's real, but it's impossible to grab. And the preacher is saying life is like that. It is smoke. It is the smoke of all smokes, he says. It is the vanity of all vanities, the hevel of all hevels. So that's kind of like a superlative phrase. Have you heard the phrase King of Kings, Lord of Lords? That means Jesus is the King above all kings and the Lord above all lords. Well, the author here is saying that life is the hevel above all hevels. It is the smoke above all smokes. The meaningless above all meaningless. And he goes through different areas of life and talks about how they're not just how they're hevel, right? And how they're all just smoke. So he talks about pleasure, right? What's the pursuit in high school? Gotta have fun, gotta party, gotta drink wine, laugh. He's done all of that. He's had the parties, he's had the wine, he's laughed. He's even tried to have hobbies. But he's like, I've done it all. And in the end, there's nothing to get from it. It's all heaven. I get nothing. The satisfaction leaves. Then he starts talking about wisdom and folly. And he says he wanted to try something more valuable. So he started to study and to gain wisdom. And sure enough, it's a better pursuit. It was better to pursue wisdom than folly. Sure, he figures that out, right? We learned that in the book of Proverbs. So that's good. And it's good to pursue wisdom. But what happens to the foolish man at the end of his life? What happens to him? He's dead. And what happens to the wise man at the end of his life? He's also dead. Yeah. So this is a cheery book. It's going to get great.
He's only mostly dead.
I see what you did there. It's the exact same thing. So wisdom is also meaningless. It's hevel, it's smoke. And he says at the end of it all, no one remembers the wise man or the foolish man. Human toil. His next thing is work and becoming wealthy. He's like, y'all, I worked hard during my life. I got more money than anybody else. I had all the wealth, I had all the businesses. I worked my butt off and I was very successful. But when I die, what's going to happen to all that? It's going to get given to someone else, and they're probably just going to drive it into the ground and ruin everything I worked for. They're not going to take care of it. They're not going to take care of it like I did, and it's going to be all for nothing. So what did I gain from doing all that? What did I gain from doing my whole life pursuing wealth and success when I just die and that all goes away? What was the point? But if you find pleasure in your work, he does find this. If you find pleasure in your work, that is a gift from God. It does say that. His next encouragement is he decided to become moral. He wanted to be a morally good, upright person. And so he realizes that God will judge every person according to their deeds. And so he's like, all right, I'll be a good person. But he realizes that both the just person and the unjust person are both made out of dust, and will go back to being dust. So what happens to the good person at the end of their life? Yes. And the unjust person, the unrighteous person, same noise. Yeah, also, yeah, hevel. A different hevel. So pursuing morality in its own way is also hevel, also smoke. So he's saying throughout all these things, not that these things are bad. He's not saying that we shouldn't pursue being a moral person. We shouldn't. He's not saying don't work hard. He's not saying don't have fun and go to parties. He's saying do them, enjoy them, but don't make them your life's pursuit. They shouldn't be what your life is all about. So towards the end of the book, you've got 11 and 12, chapters 11 and 12, and they're basically two parts of one section. 11 talks about enjoying your youth and taking advantage of your youth. And in light of the approaching dark days, enjoy the days of youth and rejoice in youth, for it is a fleeting part of life and it won't be around forever. So enjoy your youth, but don't waste it. And then kind of the transition is 12, chapter 1, or chapter 12, verse 1. It says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent and the grinders cease because they are few and those who look through the windows are dimmed. And so I think the second half of that two-section portion is old age. And I think a lot of scholars would agree with me. And he's saying, look, I'm at the point in my life where I have no pleasure in anything. I'm old, my knees hurt, I can't see, barely pee, can't sleep, can't do anything. Food doesn't taste the same anymore. I get no pleasure in my work. I have all this stuff, all this money, all these people around me to serve me, and it means nothing. Why did I spend all my life pursuing these things? And he's saying, don't forget the Lord in all that you do. And in verse 13 through 14, it says this. Will we read that 13 and 14, verse or chapter 12, 13 and 14? Or James, if you're there.
13 and 14.
Yeah.
The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil.
Fear God and keep his commands. That's our job. That is the only thing in life that is not heaven. It's not meaningless. It's not fleeting. Because at the end of your life, that will still bring satisfaction and pleasure and true meaning. That's the book of Ecclesiastes. All right. How are we doing?
Depressed? Not good.
No. I was about to get spicy. Not really. Any questions so far? Just for a minute.
Like the standard, well, the honest atheist part. When an honest atheist say a lot of those same things, except for the fear God part. Like the conclusion comes back to the belief in God. All the stuff he says, like, well, we all die anyway, so like, what does it matter? Isn't that like the honest atheistic position? Like, well, we're all going to die, so whether you're wise, whether you're a fool, doesn't really matter. Do whatever you want.
It's very hedonistic in a way.
Right, yeah. Whereas, like, the kind of dishonest atheists will kind of like produce a purpose for themselves. They're like, oh, you can just create your own purpose or something like this, Whereas I think this is the more like honest position if there were no God and there were no purpose of like fear God and keep his commandments. So I think it touches on a lot of that stuff, but it ends up in the right place.
He's definitely a cerebral guy.
Yeah.
You can tell that he's not really, it doesn't have blind faith. He's not just thinking these things, he's not just believing these things because he's been taught it. He's tried everything else. That's the only thing that, I think he may have even gone down that road of, maybe he even pursued atheism. I don't know. But at the end of the day, he's realized that this is it. Yeah. Okay, one more book. Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon. Or it'll often be written as Song of Songs. Why is it called the Song of Songs? It's just like we were talking about a minute ago with King of Kings, the superlative statement is the greatest of all songs. So, the Hebrew love song, and in fact, it might actually be more of an anthology, or like I like to say, a concept album. You ever listen to for example, Beatles' Abbey Road, or Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, where like every song put together kind of paints one big picture? That's kind of what Song of Songs is doing. It could be, some scholars are saying it's like 3 or 4 different songs put together to paint one big picture and to tell a one big love story. It's an album, concept album. And it's the celebration of love shared between a couple created in God's image. And it's the ideal marriage. And it shows their ability to satisfy each other, shows their ability to satisfy each other's need for physical love. The book pays homage to, or homage, as some would say, I guess, to the wonder and majesty of monogamous sexual love. When that love is intensely pursued with honor and faithfulness. Now, the question with this book is always about the interpretation, right? So is thick with imagery. And so it leaves a lot of debate. And so a lot of times it is interpreted mostly as allegory. And this is pretty popular in Western churches. And it's taught that, they'll say, it's not really about a man and a woman and their sexual pursuit of each other. Instead, it's about God's love for the church. Primarily, firstly, God's love for Israel, right? Because it's before the church. But ultimately, God's love for the church and how he pursues the church. But the literal interpretation, is literally a man and a woman going after each other. They're in love. There's sexual tension. They're attracted to each other, right? And they see a lot of things in each other that they're very attracted to, and they describe those things using imagery to each other. Which one is it? Or is it kind of both? Is it layered? Is it primarily like a literal love song between a man and a woman? But underneath of that, which was very common in Hebrew poetry and wisdom literature, to have kind of like a second meaning, layered the meaning. Like, yeah, it also represents how God loves and pursues his people in some capacity. Maybe it's just my scholarly brain or my simple brain, but I tend to lean more literal, and I think it's mostly about a man pursuing a woman and how a man and his wife, a healthy, there should be between a man and his wife some kind of sexual tension and sexual desire for each other, and we should be attracted to each other. Traditionally, Solomon, but I think mostly all three are okay. But if you're going to go with this one, I would say push more towards that, because it's hard to get away from the literal. Authorship, traditionally it's attributed to Solomon, but it's more likely that Solomon had the song written, that he didn't actually write it, or in the style of Solomon. Like he may have written some other songs, and this was written like in tribute to him, because it's kind of hard to say Solomon because he had a lot of wives, so it doesn't really seem like he was really solely in love with one woman. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, so he wasn't just going after one lady.
That harlot spotlight.
Yes. And so the song goes into different, is broken down into several parts, right? And so the lovers are yearning for each other. They're going back and forth, and they're describing each other. And then there's this second part where there's a shepherdess dream, where this shepherdess, she has a dream of her lover, and she's looking for her lover. She can't find him. And then the fourth or the third part is there's like this tension between the two, and they're longing for each other. They're desiring each other. And then finally they're joined together in marriage. And throughout the whole thing, they're describing each other. They're looking at each other, and he's like, "Oh, your hair it's super weird.
Like a flock of goats.
No, your hair is goats."
Is goats.
It uses metaphors.
Is like
Does it say that? Okay, I'm sorry.
It's good, greatest of all time.
But it's,
chapter
Only
4,
goat
verse, chapter 4, verse 1.
4 verse 1.
End of verse 1.
Your eyes are doves. Behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats, leaping down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes.
What's an ewe? Isn't that like one of the birds?
Ew.
I think it's some kind of like
It-
metal thing.
It is.
Your neck. Your neck is like the Tower of David. So basically,
Wife like this.
Working lovely.
yeah. But I think the point is like there needs to be some attraction and some desire for man and wife.
Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate.
Anyway, that's the book of the Song of Solomon, Song of Songs. All right. Any thoughts, questions about anything that we talked about tonight? Job.
Now, there's so many pickup lines in the Bible.
Oh yeah. You can use them on your next date night with her. I don't think that one's in the Song of Solomon.
I don't know if y'all heard her giggling profusely earlier. we have this joke. She didn't know about the whole. She was asking me like, "Who are you talking to?" And I said, "Joe." And she's like, "Who's Joe?" I'm like, "Joe Mama." You know. As soon as she heard Joe earlier, she starts giggling. And I'm like, "What are you giggling about?" Like she's shaking the whole couch. She said, "Joe Mama."
One thing I've learned being married to a foreigner is I can use the dumbest, cheesiest, oldest jokes. She's never heard them. So it's fresh. I get a good laugh. Like the other day, like a while back, I said, I think I'm going to call in sick. Sick of this job. And she just died laughing. I'm like, oh yeah. Still got it.
Simple good.
You guys really happy. Me and Anastasia watched all the first 6 Star Wars movies together.
Hey.
Plus, we watched Obi-Wan Kenobi and Rogue One as well.
Did you like them?
Figured out that she's a Star Wars nerd like me. I didn't expect it.
I didn't like the story. Maybe this first movie's a little bit outdated. But the story is pretty cool.
Yeah, but they're timeless.
It's a classic.
You like Mandalorian too.